fuel, temperature, RPM. That doesn't quite look stock, but pretty close.
Greetings, fellow DIYer, and welcome to another episode of I Didn't Shoot Any Video for That. Due to car manufacturers' desire to minimize cost, few cars came from the factory with a full complement of gauges. Most only came with the bare basics, speed, fuel, and sometimes temperature, and then leave other things like oil, amps and volts as idiot lights. Even fewer cars came from the factory with a tach. To deal with this issue, classic car enthusiasts have been augmenting their stock gauge clusters with the missing gauges from the day the cars rolled off the showroom floor. My 62 Galaxie is one of the many cars that left the factory equipped with the basic gauges and idiot lights. In my case, the car started with speed, temp, and fuel, but I wanted to also have a tach and needed to figure out where would be a good place to put it. My car is not an original restoration. However, I wanted it to appear stock and did not want to mount the gauge under the dash, on the column, or in any of the other usual mounting locations that would look unoriginal. I also didn't want to cut up the dash to insert it directly. I decided that the factory clock was really not necessary and would be a prime location for a tach. The first thing I had to do was to find a tach small enough to fit in the clock's original location, and the smallest unit I could find was a 2-inch face. To begin the installation process, the first step was to remove the original gauge cluster from the car and disassemble it. With everything apart, I found a couple of issues that needed to be addressed before I could install the tach and put things back together. First, the lens for the clock was part of the clock, and so there was now a hole in the main lens in the clock location. Also, the body of the tach was about a 1/16 of an inch wider than the hole for the clock in the back of the gauge cluster. Both issues were relatively easy to overcome. To provide the lens for the cluster, I removed the lens from the tach. This had to be done for several reasons. First, the tach bezel was large and would push the tach too far back. Second, I wanted to access the tach so that I could use an orange permanent marker to make the tach needle match the stock gauges. Third, I needed the lens from the tach to fill the hole in the main lens. The lens from the tach was quite a bit bigger than the hole left by the clock, so I covered the tach lens with masking tape on both sides to keep it from getting scratched, marked the new size I needed the lens to be, and used my bench grinder to carefully grind the lens down to size. If I was doing it now, I would actually use a tabletop sander, but at the time I did not have one. As I got the lens close, I did several test fits so that it would be a snug fit inside the original lens opening. At first, I was not sure how to hold the lens in place. I did not want to use glue or anything that would permanently adhere the new lens to the original lens in case there was ever a need to put the clock back. The solution turned out to be a homemade snap ring. I cut a thin ring of steel off the end of a piece of 2-inch exhaust pipe, then split the ring at the seam. From there, I slightly bent it to be bigger than the lens opening and painted it to protect it from rust. The ring was then gently squeezed so that it would fit inside the opening, and once it was put in place, the tension of it trying to expand held the lens in place. I then turned my attention to enlarging the opening on the back of the cluster to fit the larger body of the gauge. This was easily done with a die grinder and grinding stone. I used a Sharpie to mark the 1/32 mark around the edge of the original clock opening so I would know how much material to remove. Then, using the die grinder, I began to remove the marked material. As I removed the material, I made many test fits because I wanted the tach to be a snug fit. Once I had a snug fit, I pushed the tach into the housing, and the tension was enough to hold it into place. With the tach in place, I could now reassemble the factory gauge cluster. The end result was a quality install that looks factory. Well, almost. If you like what you've seen, please click like. If you'd like to see more, please subscribe. Thanks for watching.